in front of them. Are there any suggestions for revisions to the agenda?
I don't have any revisions to the agenda. I just want to make sure that I saw on the packet that we got, I see a lot of things that are...
Hang on, before you go on, let's have a roll call.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Chairman Brown.
Present.
Chair Pro Tem McKee.
Present.
Commissioner Bonkenstedt. Here. Commissioner Coronado. Commissioner Iteraria.
Here.
Commissioner Metcalf.
Here.
Commissioner Vanville, excuse me.
Here.
Commissioner Samuelson.
Here.
Commissioner Trevopoulos.
And we do have a quorum. All right, Julio.
Oh, I was just going to say, in the packet that we have, or at least that I downloaded, you know, I like the maps, I like everything else in there, but I'm seeing stuff that was around for a long time, especially on the R5, and I guess I'm a little getting more and more touchier about the R5. I'm seeing all this historical data and what we've done in decisions all the way from November of 2009 and all the way up to the future, and I'm saying, you know, I really don't want to go through this again and talk about all this stuff unless somebody has something that's a burning desire for them to get it out and that they just can't let go of. That's cool, but I don't want to go through this whole thing again. I mean, I see 6 months of stuff here, and I'm going, please.
Yeah, I think what we'd like to do is go through with the R5 and just confirm, here's what we're hearing, here's where we're heading. If anybody has a major issue, if we're really off base, but I think you're right. We've had lots of discussion. We've got good direction. There are a few questions we had in addition that, as we're writing it up, we'd like to get a little bit more direction on. But yeah, I certainly agree with you in terms of.
Did I miss something? I thought those were inclusions. Those inclusions were just for general reference, not for as a specific topic of discussion.
They weren't typically, although we're going to go
But
through
you know
the
us.
R5 tonight. They weren't just for background, yeah.
I think you guys have a couple questions, but we aren't going to go item by item.
No, exactly, David. We put them in there primarily just as background if people have questions or discussion. So, yeah.
David had a couple of things. He emailed. If you didn't get home or didn't get them, then
Don't send it out to everybody in the same
look for them.
I've got copies actually for everybody too.
Oh, very good.
Yeah,
All right.
basically, that was just the update that I had done about 2 meetings after that first copy on other decisions we had made, some of which have become moot over the months, as Julio points out, because we keep reconsidering.
Well, we're deliberative.
This is actually the one that Dave, what I'm saying around is the one Dave sent me as an update from the one I sent you, and he's right. It wasn't the most recent one that I distributed, so I apologize. So this one has some more recent information on it.
All right, so we do not have any revisions to our agenda, I guess, and that was item number 1. Item number 2, which, oh, yes.
At some point, I mean, one of the items included in this package was notes from last meeting. At some point,
Right.
Can we go through, there are a couple things that need to be corrected in that. I don't know whether we want to do it now or.
Sure. Sort of like minutes?
Yeah, sort of like minutes.
Okay. Let's,
You bear with me for a
about
few of them?
2 minutes for the
More or
minutes.
less.
I've got extra copies if he needs those as
And
well.
I went through my notes to compare them to this, and then I went back to double check and looked at the video, so I've got timelines on the video as well. B1, the motion to change Littles Creek quarter to red, was a 5-2 vote. David, or Linda and I both voted nay on that. That was at 23:10 on the video. 7,
B1, 5-2?
B1 was 5-2.
Okay.
7A was also 5-2. That was at 43:42 on the video. 7B, the motion to provide photos on the back cover was actually yes, 7-0, not no. That was about 2 minutes later. 7D, the vote on that was the interior 2 pages would have 8 diagrams or less, depending on what you had room for and what seemed most critical. That was at about 46 minutes into the discussion. Roman numeral 4, item A, was actually a 5-2 vote. I know Norm announced it as 4-3, but it was all but Kurt. Yeah, all but Kurt and Jenny. That was at 1:45:05. The sense of small structures, that was, all I did was note who it was there, that didn't matter. I'd quibble about item C. I don't think we really decided we were going to discourage the assemblage of parcels, but that's not an official correction, which is my sense.
Yeah, we didn't take a vote, and we'll,
No, we didn't.
we can talk about that tonight.
And that's it. That's all I had. Just, there were conflicts in my notes, so I went to the trouble
Good, no, I appreciate that.
back-checking it with the
Good, thank
video.
you. Yeah, appreciate it.
All right. There. You did it.
It happens every now and then.
As far as the notes,
good.
I was there.
Oh, it says you weren't, I'm sorry.
No, it doesn't have me absent, it just didn't have me there either.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah.
Fails to
There were two
mention.
absent. I had to revise mine. I think somebody came in late. All right.
And your name again was?
And once again, you're here. All right. Now on to the review of draft framework, I guess.
And on this one, I think you are all going to, I have done some work on it, but not enough to bring back to you because I wanted to wait until you got whatever, excuse me, whatever notes that you had, you were going to take some time to look it over. So I don't know if the best thing to do is, if you've written it down, to pass it to us, or if you want to discuss it, however you want to handle that.
Does anybody have anything? Let me take a minute. We have a couple of guests, too. Just make note of that. Looks like probably working on a scouting merit badge, maybe. I was there once, although not in a...
Maybe you want them to introduce themselves,
Would you like to introduce yourselves?
just for the record, so that way they can say that you were really here.
You can come right here.
Yeah, come up to the microphone.
You got to come to the microphone, and
Yeah.
they can get a picture of your handsome face, and, you can wave to family and friends.
I'm Jamin Armstead. I'm from Troop 535. I'm a Life Scout and just trying to get my citizenship in the community so I can get my Eagle Merit badge.
Very good.
Good luck. Thank you for coming.
Very good. You don't have to continue to sit there. You can leave early if you like.
The rest of them can't.
Tell it to the rest of us, we're all gone.
Motion to adjourn. All right. So, does anybody have comments on the draft? Maybe you had copies of...
Have extra copies, anybody needs one? Yep.
Make up for the one that I've annotated.
Absolutely.
What did I do with mine? Oh, thank you.
Okay, very good.
I'm assuming that all of us have read through this because we didn't really get a chance to go through it in detail. We went over the rough framework and everything last time. Would it be helpful if each of us sent comments back to you rather than trying to go through it all?
That'd be great.
Okay.
Discussion. Oh, go ahead.
The only comment I got, and I got a little bit of feedback, not a lot, that starting off with the downtown framework, the backside of this, as a front page, I got some positive feedback on that, just to let you know.
I've already done that, actually.
Okay. So that all being said, that's kind of all I got to say.
About what I was going to say, we talked about a different format, and I think based on what Linda brought up about the amount of white space, so that is moving now. Is that about the end of the...
Well, and I think Steve talked about putting them very, kind of across the middle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, with the explanation above and below, so that you could visually track it very easily. And I put them in that order. There's a few corrections that I've come across that need to be made that are minor border adjustments, so that they more reasonably reflect the reality that's out there. But I guess, I know that there are always some people who have word choices. I got a couple from Jenny, which I think we can easily take care of, not a problem. And I think Dave's suggestion, if you want to just hand us your notes, if you have them, then we can kind of lay everybody's out and try to come up with something that responds to
Or
people's
email
concerns.
comments to us. Too.
Or email, yeah.
Then I had a note here about that conic structures move, and I think maybe that fits in. I didn't review.
Move to boundaries
Right.
and Main Street.
Right. And the Main Street area coming all the way down on the red.
Right.
Yeah, I made that as well. I made that
Okay.
change.
I'm wondering if there's any way we could, like, more 3D, the parcels that we're talking about, like for the residential mixed-use districts, have them stand out on the page a little more so that we can see it very quickly. I mean, quicker than what we have.
I did do one, and I don't recommend this, by the way, but I'll tell you, I had a similar concern in another town that I was working on, and what they ended up doing was graying out everything but what you were talking about. But it didn't build. It really didn't work. So, I don't know. I can look at that and see if I can maybe add some shine to it, or, make it, rather than gray the background, make that pop somehow, and then it becomes normal. I'll take a look at that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, any additional comments, email them in or hand them in at the end of the meeting, I suppose. All right, discussion of bin items, and I think this is not a rehash of everything, Leo.
Actually, the revised agenda has, sorry,
Did I, yes,
There you go.
well, I wrote revised on the wrong.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess that one's here, but that was the one I put away. All right. Oh, I know what I meant. Don't look at that, it's been revised. Sorry. All right, concepts for the old downtown neighborhood.
We have a handout, we have a few questions. We'll try and keep the discussion as minimal as possible. We've had lots of discussion about this, but we wanted to go through and just confirm, and we did have a few questions that came up as we were looking at this.
I think you mentioned you've gone back and looked at 134, 135 concepts, ideas, and.
Well, what I've got each meeting you have in a month folder. So July, August, September has its own folder. And so I've got all the meeting notes from all of those. And I've gone through from the beginning and come up with 135 questions so far. I'm not quite finished. That we need to go back and Sergey and I, just for our kind of edification in terms of have we addressed this? Is this covered well enough? Is this something we want to have discussion about? So that's what we're doing, and I've got a few more months to go through. But we're getting close, I think, to getting through that, and just making sure that we've covered everything that we have discussed, because over the months we've discussed an awful lot of information. Concepts for the old downtown neighborhood. We've heard pretty clearly last time we got a vote on a given from the last meeting, which is a sense of small structures is the key element of the vision for the old downtown neighborhood. And that's enough for us to go on and build something that you can refer to. So we'll put in a draft, something that builds off of that as the vision for downtown. Because I think we've had enough discussion over time, but we'll use that as the focal point for that if
I want to make sure
is
that's.
comfortable with that. Second item was size of structures. And we had, again, if we're going to talk about the sense of smaller structures and how do we accomplish that? And there are a couple different ways. We can actually have smaller structures and put provisions, kind of a building envelope around the structures. We also talked about the lot size, and we had a discussion, we actually had a vote where we said we wanted a maximum parcel size of 20,000 square feet. So I just wanted to confirm that, that's where we are. That's what we'll build off at this point and see how that works. But we might talk about that actually then getting into the structures as well and talk about a maximum width of structures at the front setbacks and a maximum depth of structures. We don't have to come up, like all this stuff, we're at 30,000 feet when we do the plan, so we don't have to come up with specific numbers. We'll give that direction, but here's our intent, and here are the type of things that we talk about doing. So we can give some specifics in terms of examples, but we'll have that general concept of here's what we're trying to achieve. We actually put it in the plan itself. But the thing we could do is talk about a maximum width of structures, a maximum depth of structure, and what's the building up. Julio?
I guess when I'm talking about the Old Town neighborhood, specifically the R5 area, I would like to break this down a little bit differently. I find this size of structures and boundaries and parking and all that stuff to be just over the top.
Okay.
And I make no bones about that, obviously. I guess I'm interested in saying, okay, what's going to be the primary use that I want to see personally, just from my point of view, at the R5, or what we call in this neighborhood area?
Or what have you heard from residents?
Well, I'm taking all of that into account when I'm speaking. It's just my opinion. It's based on formulated information and education, I guess. Anyway, that being said, it seems like when I look at these concepts, they kind of create a number of different paths, something I still have not felt comfortable about since day one. And now, after a couple of years of thinking about it, I've gotten to the point where I'm even a little bit more adamant. But I guess I would like to say that I think that the primary use for the Old Town neighborhood should be residential, period. You know?
And that's-
What's there
that's what we need to
is what you deal with. Now, the secondary, if you will, if you want to go from a primary to a secondary, which I have more questions about than I have answers. I have some answers. Is that I don't mind the medical facility or an office or something like that. However, I do have a problem. We have, again, what states here is that we're thinking about increasing the lot sizes or increasing the square footage. I guess my comment is no, because that goes against the primary, which is residential. And I guess I don't want to see, in fact, I think what we did with Nevada Place is enough of an overstatement for that entire area for the next 40 years, in my opinion.
And I think that's exactly the discussion we need to have, and we want to get an answer from you guys in terms of, we were wondering, does that mean then that, and our understanding from the last meeting was we could go ahead and the existing dental and medical facilities could stay, but we would reduce the maximum size of those structures for all medical and dental facilities. And you could get new medical and dental facilities, the way we were going at the last meeting. So we could have the 3 existing, and then we could have additional ones coming in. But we would reduce what is now a maximum of 10,000 square feet, we'd reduce that to something else.
Well, I'm going with that. I'm going very primitive.
Okay.
Since my primary is residential, I said, you've got an existing house there, and you want to put a medical thing in there, that's the house.
Oh, okay, so no expansion for
No.
medical dental.
That's where I'm coming from.
Or a new structure that matches in size, scale, or whatever.
Well, if the sucker burns
You don't
or
have to,
whatever.
you
it's
don't
another
have to
story.
reason.
Yeah, I don't want to go through that, but I'm just saying, I don't want to play this, I mean, for 46 houses and less than, I mean, we got an entire city that's full of area that could develop for all this stuff. This is not the last parcel, this is the first parcels of the city that we've looked at.
So what would you suggest for secondary uses, or not to have any secondary uses?
No, they can still be medical, they can still be office,
They get the existing ones and new ones.
they can be the new ones, but they gotta go into the existing structures.
Right. So the existing.
Because you don't have parking. We've already, the one thing that came out of that last dentist thing is there's no parking to be found. There's barely enough for the structures that are existing. So if you can live with a small structure and a business, more power to you.
So you could expand it for residential, but you couldn't expand it for commercial, for.
You know, all those square footages of lots are very small. Some of them are bigger, but not all of them. And so I guess if you're one of the lucky ones that wants to get a 15,000 square foot lot and, you know, and still meet the setbacks and all that other good stuff, more power to you.
David?
Well, I was going to say two things. One, we established at the last meeting that to a certain extent, the downtown design standards and guidelines would help us in limiting, new, larger medical dental use because of what they have to do to satisfy the design standards on parking and parking massing, location, that sort of thing. The other reason that I think Julio may be onto something is right now we have 3 medical dental uses in there. All 3 of them are well below the kind of square footage limits we're talking about. For that matter, the 2 bigger ones are at the north end, which is really on the periphery, the edge of this zone, rather than interrupting the fabric of the residential area that we're trying to protect. So there's nothing inconsistent with the existing and trying to reduce the sizes in the future for future development. So we're not stepping on any toes.
If I could ask a question, it seems to me that when Jan was here 3 weeks ago, that, she was basically saying that Nevada Place fit into the existing zoning. And what I'm hearing you all say is that it's too much.
It fit for 2 reasons. One, because we weren't trying to do a new comp plan at the time, so we didn't have a new vision, new concept, hadn't gotten the public feedback that says, look, we really like this neighborhood, we want to keep it. The other one was, it was an existing parcel. Nobody had to go through and put together a PUD assembling 4 or 5 or 9 different parcels. So it was a different, it was a very different, a very unique situation.
So you don't want, and I guess I'm going to go back to you, Julio, when we're writing this, you don't want to see anything about limiting parcel lots. They can put 20 lot, there's not 20 lots to put together, but they could put 3 or 4 or 5 and then
I don't
build
know if I
whatever.
want to see that.
Okay.
I think
Okay, so
that's
that's a
corrupting.
change from the
That's
existing.
corrupting the primary use.
Right. I
of
do
that
too.
area. And that's what I'm
I do
going
too, so-
to argue about.
So on this, say, size of, when we're talking about maximum lot requirement,
Which would be a change.
which would be a change,
right.
then you're in favor of that.
Yeah, I'm not.
No.
No, I
No,
just
that's-
want the
that's
way it
not-
is.
No, I think what Julio's talking to is the same conclusion we came to 2 weeks ago. Don't focus on lot sizes, assembly, or the size of the developer. It's the physical environment you're living with. The size, what was the word you used, Jenny?
It's more of like-
Articulation
Yeah,
of the
with
building.
the design.
Right,
There's
rather
certain
than,
things you can do to make it feel smaller scale,
Right.
more pedestrian friendly, instead of trying to go in and rewrite the zoning and change this and change that to put all these.
And they barely have sidewalks, so
Some of
that are decent enough. So I don't want to go and create a big explosion of population, or not population, but of impact, greater impact to that area. In fact, I'm going the other way. I think that it's very pleasant. It's been very pleasant, and I would like to see it continue to be very pleasant.
The sense is our focus is on what you can sense, what you can see, what you experience as you walk through the area. You don't see, experience, or know anything about parcel sizes. All you know is the concrete effects of that in terms of the number of, the detailing of, the sizes of the buildings that surround you as you walk through the area.
So no to parcel size maximums, but yes to structural size maximums. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
What does that mean? You tell me what that means before I agree to it.
Okay, no to parcel size means that they can assemble parcels and as far as they want, as long as what they build on that are structures that are smaller structures. So there would be a maximum width of structure, a maximum depth of structure, a maximum square footage. I don't know what it would be, but there'd be some kind of limitation on the size of the structures themselves, but not on the parcels. Is that what we're hearing?
Not for me.
Jenny?
I guess when I was looking at the zoning in the R5, I mean, it's already fairly restrictive in the sense of it being the highest density residential. So I I would rather go with the design in the sense of keeping it at a certain scale, sense of scale, small scale. I like the vision of the sense of small structures, but I'd rather not see putting even more restrictions on what's already there. But
You noticed when we watched the tape again, that the body language said you were kind of uncomfortable when we went to that discussion. Is that, I don't think you got a chance to say that last time.
yeah, and I guess the other thing too is I've been going through the R5 that was put together with, let's see, talking about the height limitations, this by Dick Farley. And that was one thing that did catch me with the R5 is that the maximum height being 30 feet is really a very single-family height limit, and people will try to do 3 stories with 30 feet, but you can't, and it mentioned in here too that it's hard to achieve the roof slopes as required by the design standards to get a nice design 3-story, because people will do it. But it's hard to have that articulation with the roofs to kind of have it be more residential in character rather than more commercial looking. So I guess design-wise, I'd really like to see that there's the capability that whoever, whether it's the owners that are already there or new owners that come in, that they are able to do things that look aesthetically pleasing for the area.
And I think we were
from a
recommending
scale.
35 when we looked at the height. Is
Yeah,
that, so
yeah.
35, I think, for that, because of that discussion, so.
And that's what I was, in my memory too, that there was a recommendation was 35 feet. But in the zoning right now, it's 30 feet with the potential of stepping it if you have a setback.
And when we started talking about that 35 feet, that's where Norm and I think in particular are saying, okay, then what you start looking at is how do you protect the little bungalows from a maxed out structure, new structure next to it. The other thing is, quite frankly, given the 30-foot height limitation and the setbacks and the design standards and guidelines on driveway curb cuts and that sort of thing, I'm sorry, you couldn't max out that density in that area if you wanted to. I mean, the only way Nevada even came close, Nevada Place came close was by getting an exemption on heights and setbacks and that sort of thing. So, you know, we're not, it's not like the existing zoning threatens these huge monolithic towering buildings. So all we're talking about doing is providing a little clearer direction to an existing property owner or a developer who wants to buy and develop a property, the DRC, or to us when it comes time to evaluate and rule on a proposal.
Can we take votes on parcel size, massive and size of structures? So we just have a real clear idea of where we need to head here.
Certainly. Is your, well, let's see, where do you want to start?
Parcel size, I think
Okay.
the fact that, I think what I'm hearing is to not limit.
Okay.
Was the last, I
You
think I heard.
had something in there. I was going to go a different direction, but
Okay.
shall we just,
Sorry.
well, I was going to ask if we could incorporate the two, a sense of small structures with a primary use in the Old Town neighborhood of residential. I didn't put those together very well, but that's what Julio brought up and what we had from last time. Can we start with that? Is that, or are we in agreement that that is the vision there? And then, but specifically, I get shrugs and so on. Everybody seems to agree.
Wake up.
We're okay. I had a response from David.
Norm's getting so he can read all the subtleties from everybody.
It's a lot easier to see everybody here than in the council chambers, I must say. So then what do we want to do about parcel size? Does that statement take care of that, and we don't need to be specific on 16,000 or 20,000 feet for max?
Well,
Or do you want to do that also?
No, I think that if what you're saying is a primary use for that area is residential, then the next question in my mind, pardon me, is, you know, I have had a bone to pick about this R5 since a long time ago, and I still have it. R5 is the inappropriate use or land use for that particular area of the city, period. In other words, if I was to make any recommendation on this comp plan, is that the city, in order for them to maintain the primary use of residential as it is today in that particular area, R5 is not the appropriate zoning category. That's my second question.
And tell us what's wrong with it. Is it the density? Is it the?
All the above. It
Okay.
is
But it should be
not,
higher, should
it
be
is
lower, should
not, it is not conducive, and I'll get around to all of
Okay,
this stuff.
okay.
But I don't want to go and pick apart the R5.
Okay.
I'd rather go with a solid statement that, of what's there, and the fact that if we want to keep what's there, how do we make sure that what's there is kept there, okay? That's just the, call it an assumption, call it whatever you want. Once it's agreed upon, it's an assumption, you know? But, because right now, you know, I see R5, there's a lot of places in the city where R5 may or may not be appropriate. In this opinion, this board's opinion, this is not an appropriate R5 zoning category for this area. Because I don't want to see what I'm hearing about for all this stuff. We went through a lot of brain damage, and I listened to all of it. But, you know, it's all predicated on a lot of lots getting together, a lot of ownership, et cetera. I mean, I just don't feel, from what I heard from the people out there, and I've driven that place now, I'm getting to the point where I'm getting pretty comfortable driving up and down and recognizing the whole place. And I think it's a nice community area. And I'm feeling more upset with the way we're kind of going off and saying that we need to up the height, we might need to up the lot sizes and stuff like that. I think we're just destroying something that's really nice.
How about adding, no, David, thank you.
Now I'll shut up.
Primary use should be residential with a sense of small structures, and the city consider revising the zoning in that area.
That would be my recommendation,
So-
based upon everything else we just seen, and we create that kind of a,
To a new zoning category?
yeah, whatever they, with the criteria that we come up with in this plan, yeah.
And that, for the purposes of the comprehensive plan, that indicates what we're looking for and suggests a direction that we pursue as separate action. You know, we're going to rezone this area.
Well,
Which may or
the
may
city
not.
council can rezone it.
Right.
I just want to give them the direction saying, this is one area where I'm not crazy about seeing a lot of
Multi-family
urban growth,
power, yeah.
compactness and all. I mean, it's pretty damn compact the way it is. I mean, those lots are pretty small.
David.
But talking about rezoning isn't part of the vision. I mean, we're
No.
talking, right.
No, I'm
That's
talking about giving
implementation.
everything, I'm talking about everything else around it to say, this is the picture we want to say, want to create
Right.
for this area. That's what I'm.
Sense of
trying
small
to-
structures, primary use residential, but we're going to continue to allow maybe smaller scale medical, dental.
Yeah, if they can
So
fit
then, in
into the
terms
same
of
structures-
implementation, the question is, at some point, we're going to have to decide, aside from the vision, aside from the individual elements, what are we recommending as an implementation means? Are we talking about changing it to one of the other existing zones?
City
zoning
council,
R3,
and
X,
planning
R4?
staff, and everybody else are going to have to figure that out.
Okay. Or as opposed to a whole new zoning classification.
I mean, that
which
could be
is
true, but
where
I'm-
we were 9 months ago.
Obviously, we're not in a position to do that, so I'm not going to, but I'm saying, I know it's not working, and the R5 is not working.
Steve.
If we're going to be having a variety of housing in the downtown area, we pretty much need that to stay a single-family type houses, because there's going to be nothing else like that in the whole downtown area, and so that would be taking out one of our varieties of housing if we let that go away.
We already have apartment buildings, and
And it's the only lineage that we have to our past that will remain. I mean, everything else could change.
As long as someplace in there we're making it clear that what motivated us to do this was the public comments that expressed that they value this neighborhood, and not beyond the comments, what they've shown in terms of upgrading and adding on to and remodeling the space says that they really mean it. It isn't, they aren't just saying it. Because if that changes 10 years, 15 years down the road, then that's a basis for somebody coming in and saying, the condition you established for preserving that neighborhood was X, that is now changed, we need to reconsider.
I guess clarification of two things. Single family, is that where we want to go, single family as opposed to small structures? Because, okay, so we want to go, can we take a vote on that? Just so we've got the numbers.
Can I just ask a question? Are they all single-family now?
No, there's
No, they're not.
They're not. So we'll end up creating.
There's nothing more than a duplex there, and I guess that's the only other thing. I mean, where there's currently duplexes, I don't see it, again, I'm interested in that particular neighborhood remaining the way it is, including the duplex, because that's existing.
Right.
But I don't want to see us, create 10,000 square foot for something where somebody has to scrape off the entire area and do, some other type of unit that really is totally different than what's there. That's my fight. Now, I might be the only one that's saying that, and we'll vote that way, but at least you know where I'm coming from.
But we are crossing a line here. I mean, we're doing a little swerve from what we were saying 5 minutes ago.
No.
It was small structures, primary use residential, and now we're saying, not just small structures, but small, single-family structures.
We may or may not be.
Okay, well, but I'm saying that's the direction we're heading right
That's
now.
the question. Do we want to include some kind of language about single family? That's Dennis's question. So, how many of us want to include something about single family
Question.
for that area? Okay.
Before you get into this, I think this is an important question. Where are those duplexes on this land? See, that's the question. I think we're only talking about 2 or 3.
Yeah, we are.
There aren't too many of them.
And that's my point. I'm trying to, be
I didn't bring that map, unfortunately, but.
Shame on you.
Oh, I know. Does everybody have this one?
yes.
Okay, some version of it. If not, I have extras. So, sure, Jim.
Most of the ones I saw are all single family. High percentage of them.
Yeah, a lot of them don't look like duplexes. For example, the northeast corner of Nevada and Berry is a duplex. He at our neighborhood meeting said he'd like to do a
Is
triplex.
that this up
Northeast
here?
corner, yeah.
Right,
That's
north
the brick,
of
Big green.
that's
This
the
one
brick
here.
flat roof.
This one right
Yes,
here.
flat roof, yeah, it's got the addition in back. And he said he's got 2 down, he'd like to do a 3rd unit at some point. You go up that street, the corner where Nevada meets Curtis, that south triangular parcel, that is a
Right.
duplex. There's a duplex, there's an up-down duplex, you remember at the Uptown Dental Clinic meeting, it's an up-down, it's the 3rd house down, I believe, on the right side, just down from Crestline on Nevada. And remember, the neighbors were talking about the fact that there were 4 girls,
Oh, yeah.
there were 6 girls who lived there.
Oh, yeah.
Third down.
Duplex. That didn't look like a duplex either. So there are there's some duplexes in here that don't look like duplexes, but there are some. They tend to be in this northern section rather than the southern section. So more where you see the non-resident owners, the secondary address, the green structures, those tend to be where the duplexes are. I can't think of others that are offhand which are duplexes, but that may be about it. So.
Do we need to spell out single-family when we can say something about the existing residential?
Well, I guess my other way of looking at this is saying that, and I'm going to throw that, this is just nothing to vote on, just conversation. If somebody has 15,000 square feet, and they got one lot and they can put another structure on there for single family, and still make the setbacks, the height, parking for a single or whatever, what they got, then I think it's okay. But if they can't, c'est la vie.
And I think currently it'd have to be attached. You'd have to expand. You could have
But
two
that's my
separate
point.
structures,
But what you're saying.
Right.
I'm not opposed to that, but I'm not going to say I want to just automatically and arbitrarily agree to it either.
Okay.
I just think that I'm just interested in, this is a nice neighborhood the way it is. And if you have a couple of duplexes in there and if somebody else is is somebody or could somebody buy more than one lot and decide they want to do something? Yeah, probably. The question becomes, it depends on what the zoning is at that point in time. Still R5, they could go crazy, but based on our recommendation, we still want to see it as if the recommendations, we want to see it as single family or something comparable to that.
We do a straw poll and.
Yes, I was going to say, I have a good sense of what you're saying. So I think the question is, do we want to use the language single-family or
Small structure.
style of
Small structures.
as opposed to small structures? So how many people like the single-family language better? You use single-family, I don't see anyone. So we like the sense of small structures language, and how many like that still? I think that's everybody. Okay, so we're not going to.
The other thing we've not heard, I mean, we've talked about, I just want to clarify that, or just confirm this. We've heard people saying we want to keep the neighborhood like it is, but it's more kind of the scale of the neighborhood. We've not heard anybody say, let's not demolish anything. We've got to prohibit demolition and redevelopment or expansion of existing houses. But we're going to, expansion, I may be wrong, and that may be where we go, but
That's a tough term.
I haven't heard anybody say demolition, but I think expansion maybe we need to, if that's correct, let's move on to expansion.
In some sense, it becomes, how far are we willing to encroach on property rights in order to accomplish the vision for the traditional residential close-in neighborhood? That's really what it comes down to.
That's why Sarah Jane and I have been thinking, and we've talked to Linda and Nora about this, in their agreement, that if we end up with something with different than the existing zoning, what the existing land rights are for people, we really need to go back out to the neighborhood, and we were thinking about doing that the first week in December, where that gives us enough time to get flyers out to the property owners, mailers out to the property owners to let them know we're going to meet, and then we have this list of here's what we're seeing as the vision, here are the characteristics, here's what we're proposing, and just make sure that they're okay with this, because this is probably the one area that we're really talking about change. Every place else we're talking about, even though we're talking about that in order to achieve stability and no change, it's the one place where we'd be changing the zoning or the design standards, where we're talking about making it more restrictive than it is in terms of, to try and retain that character. So we really thought it was important to go back out to the neighborhood and make sure we got that information out there and see what the reaction was.
So your question now is about demolition only or demolition and expansion?
Let's do demolition first.
Okay. Do we want any kind of language in here discouraging or frowning on demolition of existing structures? Linda looks
How
like
many
she's-
structures are, how many of these houses are on the historic?
the list of
None on the
merit?
list of merit either?
None.
And that would trigger something, the list of merit, I think, triggers a letter requesting time to review with the historic preservation staff and so on. Okay, so do we want, the question is, how many of you want to include language about demolishing or, prohibiting the demolition of any of these structures? Anybody? Okay, I see no hands, so I don't think we're going to discuss that. On to expansion of the existing structures. Of course, that's regulated, setbacks and so on and so forth, but do we have any problems? What's your question specific? Do we want to discourage expansion?
Yeah, do we want to control the expansion or limit the expansion? I think limit the expansion is probably the way to go. Is there support for limiting the percentage of expansion, the square footage of expansion? Somehow the extent these houses could be expanded. That'd be important to know, I think.
I'm sorry, I got to ask another question.
Okay.
It is apparent to me that this neighborhood was created before the R5 zoning was in place.
Yes, and I think the R5 was tailored to it to some degree.
Well, I'm not buying that it was or wasn't. I guess I want to know, what was the original zoning and what were the original setbacks?
Probably wasn't it?
There was no zoning.
That's fine. It's good to know.
Yeah.
So, that's why I'm asking these questions. Because before I can go off and see all this other stuff, I need a basis. So I guess the question that I have is, on these particular sites, what would be the approximation of front yard setbacks? That's my first question. What would be the approximation of rear line setbacks and size? And I guess that's what I want to, if we could establish that as saying what is the average, because I don't think the R5.
And I would say, I don't know if we need to know the numbers as much as, if that's the concern, you could certainly write it that way, that it needs to be consistent with the average setback on the block or the average setback, of the adjacent houses. Or,
and I guess
I think that's a good way to go.
I'm more for that than trying to say, well, let's go with R5 setbacks, because I'm not buying that the R7
Right. Oh, no,
were
I
made
think,
for this.
no, I would agree, absolutely. And there's such variety in here that you definitely aren't going to,
Yes, part of the issue of trying to regulate it so that people know what to expect, which is what Norm always talks about it, is that there's even though it looks like a cohesive neighborhood as you walk down it, it's really quite a lot of variety in terms of the size of the structures, the dates that they were built. I mean, some of them are ranch houses, some of them are Victorian houses, and so when you try to, and that's part of its charm, and so when you try to find the average of that, it becomes a little bit difficult. I think that, at least I'm feeling, and I'll check in with Dennis, that we're at least getting a sense of where you want to go with this. It may take some time for us to figure out how to do it so that it can be regulated and people can know what to expect.
I want to just say, too, because of the fact I'm not afraid to speak, I'm real nervous about all the other folks that are not speaking. I don't want to just make the assumption just because I'm speaking, everybody's, I don't want to give that impression. I'd rather back off. I mean, I can tell you where I'm at, obviously, but I'd rather hear from the other folks to either have agreements or disagreements or whatever.
Well, we're taking our straw poll votes, which I think are pretty one-sided so far. So your question is about expansion. Do we regulate it via setbacks in the style of the existing, and then you'll try to write something? Is that what we want to have happen? This section of the comprehensive plan says, expansion will be controlled by the existing nature of the setbacks, sort of an average.
Yeah, and typically you'll do it by block or you'll do it by the adjacent properties. You make it as small an area as possible. Usually adjacent properties is the easiest to measure. You start doing a full block, it starts being very complicated. If you do adjacent properties, then you know you're not going to have a new house that's going to be totally out of character with its neighbors.
I'm having a hard time figuring out what specifically we're talking about doing. Either we stay with the existing zoning, which has setbacks, or we come up with a new zoning which would have presumably comparable setbacks. You're not proposing that within this zoning district we deal with expansion or filling of the block or setbacks on a parcel-by-parcel basis.
Except there are examples, lots of jurisdictions go through and say, in this neighborhood, because we've had this problem, because the houses weren't built where the zoning said they should be built, you get a new house coming in building where the zoning says, and it looks totally out of character. You actually you get down to when a house is proposed, you look and say it's got to be at the average of the adjoining setbacks. So you do it at that level. You don't do it trying to the plan or the zoning itself, other than the language saying it's got to be the average. So you set that language and that kind of formula in place.
Is anybody else having a hard time visualizing this? Because I'm not seeing it.
What this reminds me of is sort of the design standards along...
I can give you a couple examples that would help. So,
design standards along Main Street where they said we want to bring those facades forward so that you didn't have, a variety of...
It's the reference to the averages I'm talking about.
Right.
So if I'm going to build, there is one empty lot in this whole area, nice, convenient example. Sure. If I decided I wanted to go in there and build something in there, You're telling me I have to go through the entire R5 zone and determine what the average setback
Your
is?
immediate neighbors is what
Oh,
we're
just the
saying.
immediate
Immediate
neighbors.
neighbors.
So if
The
one
property on either side.
is 20 feet back
Right.
per zoning,
Right.
and the other is older and it's 50 feet, I have to split the difference?
Yeah.
Why?
Or you could come with another formula, which is.
Why not within that rather than average of that?
I don't think it's going to be an issue that you or I are going to ever have
I
to
mean,
do.
the only-
But why say something that effectively can't really happen?
There are there are lots of examples out there where it works. And the one thing that comes up that you need to think about is if you're next to that vacant lot, what do you do? So you have to put in some provision for the vacant lot. Then you say, well, how do you average that? So, yeah.
So maybe what we ought to be looking for is a way of addressing this issue without getting ourselves so tangled in knots over,
I really-
in this case it's this, and in
Oh,
that case it's that.
No, we wouldn't write those specific in there. We would just say, we just want it to match its neighbors. And so the language, if we give that direction, the zoning would be very, very simple. It's actually simpler than.
So now we're talking setbacks, not expansions of existing. I thought that's where we started.
Well, it's a way to control it. So we could talk about front setback, you could talk about side setback and the average of the side setback. So you have the same character as your neighbors.
But they would write that. We're trying to give them an idea of what we're looking for. Linda or Steve or both? Steve?
Well, without actually trying to be too politically correct on this,
Take a shot.
yeah. My ideas of this neighborhood is to leave it how it is. No changes, no nothing, no expansions. Don't change it at all, leave it the way it is. However, this is where I'm not one of the property owners there. People there do have the property, do have the rights. I would like to keep it as close to where it is now without infringing and taking away everybody's rights.
So, to answer your question, can we suggest to staff that expansion be controlled by a consideration of the adjacent properties and their setbacks, and staff comes back with more specific language?
Some language.
So, sure,
Does that answer your question?
absolutely.
Are we in agreement with that? Anybody really want to change that approach? Does anybody want to try to put numbers on it? And Steve, do you want the vacant lot to remain vacant? David's mulling this over. Let's try to move on if he's got some more questions and see what they come up with.
Okay.
Can we do that?
Boundaries, I think, we had discussion about taking Nevada Place out, rezoning that because it didn't seem consistent with what you pictured as the R5. It's there, it's approved, I mean, that's the other side of it. Is it worth the effort to rezone it and to change the boundaries on the neighborhood when it's already approved and built or just leave it as it is? Yeah.
Basically, it's either as it is in the current zoning map, which then includes Nevada as a grandfathered exception, or it's as we've drawn it here without Nevada Place in there, right? I mean, those are the two choices.
So, yeah, and how big a problem is if it's grandfathered in? Not terrible, I wouldn't think in this case.
I like to go and just say Nevada Place stays as R5. And the terminology again escapes me, but the Old Town neighborhood, the goal was to make a more relative zoning category to meet it.
So on this drawing,
That's a differentiation.
I remember I changed it to take Nevada Place out and put it into the mustard color.
Actually, I thought it is already out.
It is.
No,
According to this, it's out.
it is.
It's
But
out.
But it's not, I mean, according to this, it's different from the actual zone.
Well, I would go with what you have here because it's out of the old neighborhood.
So we don't worry about the zoning, but we take
No.
out what's the definition of the neighborhood itself.
Correct.
Then the other question is, this area, of course, R5 actually comes up like this. So this is zone CA,
And I like that coming down to the red.
So then are you proposing rezoning that area to R5? I mean, if you're talking about putting in place, oh, thank you.
I just remember, I
Putting-
remember the
yes,
lady who was
putting
complaining.
in place provisions that are going to control how this is built or how it is retained, then it seems to me you need to rezone that area, propose rezoning that, or bring it up, so you're just talking about the R5. That's where you've got the design standards and guidelines, that's where you've got the zoning that's in place.
If you all think that it's more of a pain to, the easier of the two is to bring that tan line or that light line, ivory line, up higher to where the
R5
whole
boundaries,
neighborhood-
right here.
Natural boundary is.
Actual
Yeah,
boundary of R5.
but I guess I would have to visually go and look at that before I totally,
What has happened is we do have a lot of uses in
well,
here.
this is
that
different. This
have-
is interesting.
They've had the expectation of being commercial over the years, so they've actually, some of
Actually,
them had converted.
It looks like I fixed that.
This is not, this is different.
Oh, you did fix it on that one?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm
good.
looking at this and I'm going,
Okay, cool. Never mind.
come on, I want to fight with you.
We're moving forward, aren't we?
It's fixed. Okay. And Nevada Place, we're going to leave out of the neighborhood, but not talk about changing the zoning. So, is that correct?
David?
If we take this collection of what we're proposing to the residents, the owners in the area, and they come back and say, what do you mean you're going to rezone us, da-da-da-da-da, and we decide, okay, we're not going to rezone, then it might be easier to live with Nevada Place in this R5 zone as an exception, or grandfather, whatever you want to call it, and then depend upon whatever means staff comes back to suggest as an alternative to rezoning in order to accomplish our purpose. Otherwise, you run the risk of that parcel, where Nevada Place is, protruding into this R5 or whatever it gets retitled zone, but then being zoned as if it were on Prince Street or someplace else. I'm just saying, once, if we're going to go through this exercise of getting public comment again, before we decide what to do, let's leave our options open before saying, yep, this is what we're going to do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Christ, everything we do is subject to change.
Well, I was trying to establish a reason, the basis for expecting
Okay,
change.
land use, we've talked about, I think, parking was the other question. Should the plan recommend that medical and dental parking be accommodated in a particular location? How do you accommodate it? Because as Julio mentioned here, that was the question. There's not a lot of room on these sites, and you don't really want it in your front yard, you don't really want it in your backyard. Do we just say it's going to be?
My comment's the same one we gave for the guy who has the existing dentistry that had wanted 19, would have to have 19 spaces. Pretty much exempted him. And I think you're going to have to exempt everybody else, but the clincher is, they got to stay to the same size as the,
Which is going to control it, yeah.
yeah.
I remember during that application discussion specifically being told this was not binding us for future site applications. So I don't buy the argument that we let them get by without having to provide zone-required parking. We have to let everybody else do it. I don't buy that at all.
Oh, no, you don't have to. It's your choice. What do you want to recommend?
Well,
Yeah,
It's a case-by-case hearing.
it is.
Individual by individual.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be good to have some kind of policy in here in terms of, do you want to accommodate it or not? Just what's your anticipation in terms of, what's your direction? If the zoning has changed, if the design guidelines are changed, do you want them to have to accommodate parking or not?
Well, and I guess the comment is, it's a secondary use. It's not the primary use that I want to see there.
Okay.
So by it being already a secondary use, in and of itself, there is some discouragement. But if somebody who wants to start that kind of a business and has the wherewithal to go and do it and start there, that's fine. The idea is that eventually they would move on. They wouldn't be able to be there as their practice grew or whatever. They too would grow and leave.
Under the list you have, which is on-street, as A, in front yards, in side yards, and backyards is B, C, and D. In structures is E, off-site is F. I could cross out, I think, personally, in front yards, in structures, and I would be okay sometimes in side yards and backyards as long as you weren't paving the entire lot. I don't want to see the whole thing paved to accommodate current parking requirements. So,
What did the existing design standards say? They don't allow any of these locations.
It's the parking requirements that lead you to try to provide the parking on site. And so I guess I'm just answering his question. I don't think the design standards apply, do they?
As far as I know, they do. That's why we have them.
I'd have to go back and look at them. I don't remember what they say about parking.
There are some existing, there's at least one existing medical office there that has paved over their backyard, and that's where the parking is.
Pretty much paved. Dr. Leo's is a fairly new one, and it's pretty much, the backyard is paved.
But my recollection of the design standards and guidelines is to, if not outright prohibit, at least discourage parking in front yards. They're trying to reduce or eliminate the domination of highly visible parking. So right now, as things stand, all of these options are not available to somebody wanting to put in parking on the site.
Well, all of them are not, that's correct.
He's got on the street as the first one, so that's obviously a possibility. And off-site, there was some discussion last hearing about the dental office in this area, about them using off-site parking, and I think there was some negotiations about that. So then, okay, based on the design standards, front yards and side yards off the table. Is this answering your question? I guess, is there any objection that we leave on-street, off-site, and there's existing, well, just looking at the map, it's a little difficult to tell, but at the west end of the lot, it looks like it's maybe a third still. I think there's a slope there. I think a third of it is whatever natural trees it looks like and so on. So there's parking allowed in the backyard, but not the entirety of the backyard. I don't know how this occurred or what.
That's down the hill.
Right,
The trees are down the hill.
right. But apparently still, part of that lot.
And as far as structures are concerned, if we are saying we're discouraging larger medical office facilities as a secondary use, then in practical terms, you're eliminating any chance of structured parking as well. Nobody's going to put in a parking structure for a 5,000 square foot medical office building. It just isn't going to happen.
Put it in a garage. I can't imagine.
Does off-site parking encourage knocking down a building and putting a parking lot on another building, where another building would be?
Not in this zone, or not in this zoning district, for what we said above, 4B.
Yeah, there was.
Right, where, at the last meeting, you guys voted, actually to delete that. It's an existing allowed use as a conditional use. But you voted to say, let's get rid of that.
So that's a good what-if question, Steve. We anticipated at the last meeting.
Right.
That give you enough answers about parking? Oh, I'm sorry, Jane.
Just in general with the parking, if it's on-street, the spaces that are in front of a lot, that you could reasonably say that parking is going to be going with what's in front of that particular site. So it could be very well a combination of on-street, in front of, or on the perimeter of your lot that you're talking. So you're not counting someone's space that's across the street from your property. And then in the backyards, and in the design standards, I believe there's something with screening too. Mm-hmm. So there's ways to screen the parking so that it's not going to be a problem with neighbors, like headlights or certain things that can be done, whether fencing or vegetation. But There's, I think, ways that you can do the parking if it's, as long as, I think, it's not in your front yard, a parking lot. So tucking it in behind the structure or trying to visually make it attractive, push back, so it's not in the front, except for maybe on-street parking that you're counting the spaces just on your lot in front of it.
That kind of goes into one of the issues that came up on-street parking. If we find that the recommendation from DRC is to widen the sidewalk and eliminate the on-street parking, well, if the comprehensive plan is saying use on-street parking as part of what is available, it's more important to have parking than wider sidewalks, or the wider sidewalks need to be negotiated into the landscaping, then that kind of addresses that too. That's one reason to have on-street, I think, listed. Have we exhausted that?
I think we're okay.
Got your answer? Okay. Thanks, Jenny. That was good too. All right. So,
Number 6, I think, is we've already talked about. It would be kind of general recommendations of what we're trying to accomplish, and could do it either through the zoning or through the downtown design standards and guidelines. And then we just had it open-ended. Anything else that we haven't talked about that you think is important to include for direction?
no.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to not having the, what are they called? Those wonderful streetlights.
Sternberg?
Sternbergs. I would not like to see Sternbergs in this neighborhood.
The issue we're going to have, kind of as Suzanne has said before, it's really public works. We can make that
I
recommendation.
understand that, but we can make a recommendation.
Yeah.
So are streets and,
All the
No,
right
but we
away.
can make a recommendation.
Make a
Since,
recommendation,
To
sure.
the best of my knowledge, I thought that was an Excel thing too.
It is in terms of they do the
And
implementation.
money and all that other good stuff that are even beyond public works.
And kind of the responses is from Charlie, and we've got a copy of the planning area and where the lights will go. Is it in the residential areas, there are fewer lights, it's wider spacings, it really does have less impact, but does maintain that sense of identity and that character. So you get that continuity that you are now in downtown, you identify. This is old downtown, so. Okay.
You're not going to sell me on that.
Okay.
Was there a,
I would like to see that plan, though.
Okay.
I would love to see that plan.
Dr. Cole
We
had
have time on
had
it.
a follow-up item. Can you email that to us, workable, or?
Probably just a hard
It's
copy.
a hard copy is what I've got right
Okay.
here. Yeah, 'cause it's old enough.
Maybe have that available next time,
Sure, right, if we have time tonight, we
Okay.
can get it to you. So.
if we have
so
time.
under other, we've still got lighting standards. We really haven't touched on our lighting, whatever, standards or whatever. We still haven't really talked about sidewalks and tree lawns. Yeah, I know the reference in 6, Dennis, was direction from 30,000 feet above. But I'm not sure that everything we're talking about trying to contribute to this sense of the traditional residential neighborhood is really going to be discernible from 30,000 feet.
We've gotten a little closer, haven't we?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. So those are two things that occur to me.
Lighting, lawns.
And do we have some kind of consensus in terms of what direction we want to take on this?
I'd be interested to see what Charlie's lighting plan looks like when you say wider spacing and so on, but still that sense, picture's worth 1,000 words.
And if we're going to go to the residents in the area, that's one of the things we ought to be prepared to explain to them. Here's where we're headed with that.
Absolutely.
And why.
Or we're not.
You know, finding the balance between enough light for safety, not so much light that's obtrusive in a residential setting. We better plan on going with that in mind.
I'll be honest with you. After driving even around a little bit tonight when it's darker and stuff, take a good drive around the city and see.
Oh, yeah. It's all over the place.
Well, they're not. Sternbergs are not all over the place. They're not
They're
even.
only downtown and Bowles and Boulevard up to Windermere.
And that's my point.
Right, well, that's Charlie's point in the plan.
If he wants to go and flood that area, I can care less, but residential is off limits.
Well, then, I
And
guess
I
are
would
we
say that
saying,
across the board for the entire city.
we're saying residential is not part of downtown then? 'Cause
Correct.
okay, so it's a
In this
separate
regard.
neighborhood.
Yeah, it's an old town neighborhood. You're not
Gee
gonna sit
whiz.
there and-
Suzanne's getting ready to say something.
We have different height limits, we have
I mean,
different
you could put that in your comp plan. If you want to say downcast lighting and residential, you can put that in there, and then if council adopts that, then that's direction to public services of what kind of lighting council wants in that area. I don't see any problem with that.
I mean, it doesn't do much good for us to try and define a different character for this old downtown neighborhood, residential neighborhood, character different from Main Street, and then let somebody put exactly the same lights with exactly the same lighting levels and glare factor in both areas. That makes no sense at all. It just doesn't.
Does it accomplish what we want if the residential area, our recommendation is the residential area is included in the dark skies considerations, and without deciding what the lights look like, trying to determine spacing or anything else, but that they meet the dark skies, or the lighting, I don't think we call it dark skies, but whatever the lighting ordinance was that applies to the rest of the city.
Our goal is to define what this area is going to look like. Means of accomplishing it, the kind of fixture, the spacing of the fixture, the wattage of the fixture, the shielding, that's a staff decision. That's ways and means. Let them figure it out. We're defining what we want it to
So
look
you're
like.
saying yes to a fixture, just fewer of them? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well,
Not for me.
We're saying define standard performance, not
I'm not-
specify fixtures.
I'm not even doing that. I'm making it very simple. No higher lighting in residential across the entire city, period, including this area.
I liked what Suzanne said, downcast lighting in residential areas.
Well, the problem with that, though, is you can be, you can, watch out what you ask for that one.
Right.
I mean, all the lights behind you there are all downcast, but the fact that there's so many of them make the place look like a Christmas tree.
And remember, you're talking about semi-rural residential areas and very dense, multifamily, high-rise apartment residential areas. Don't expect the lighting to look the same in both. It won't. It shouldn't. That's why I'm saying, let's define what area by area should be like, appropriate to the residential character. Let the ways and means be decided by staff.
Counselor, am I correct in thinking the rest of the city and the residential areas are subject to, developments are subject to the lighting ordinance?
Well, I think part of the issue is, I believe the city exempts itself from the lighting ordinance. So when you're talking about right-of-way property, I think as a practical matter, you're correct. I think there are some Sternbergs out there in other.
The only one, Bowles out to the city limits, to the west.
Right.
Riverfront across has them as you go along Prince, so that neighborhood has them. We go east on Littleton Boulevard to Windermere, and I believe that's it. I think that's it.
That's it?
I mean,
Downtown.
yeah, I don't think you want to get as specific as Sternberg's, because that's a very certain kind of light. I think you want to talk about it in terms of maybe some of the terminology that's in the current lighting ordinance. And, I mean, my point at that hearing was not really a discussion of what you could put in your comp plan, but it was more because this was a site-specific plan, and the city's property, for whatever reason, was included on that plan. That's where we ran into problems, is that you attempting to regulate what the city was doing on someone else's PDO plan. I mean, it just became very confusing, but I think if you look at it from the fundamental level, it would have been very difficult to have told that applicant, this is what we want you to do with the lighting, when it was in fact the city making that determination. But I think that the comp plan is a completely appropriate place to put that and to send that message of what you want your vision to be.
I want to make 2 points in that connection. Number one, The comp plan is not addressed just to private property owners. It is to everyone. The city, any special districts that come in, to the extent we have influence over them, this is to define the character, the nature, the appearance of the community, period. As far as that particular application was concerned, the only reason we weighed in on that was because city staff had made a quid pro quo with the property owners saying, we'll let you do this, but you have to pay for these lights. So that transcended the line between property owner and the application and what the city's responsibilities are. It became a single issue at that point, and our response was, especially in listening to the comments of the neighbors, that probably wasn't a good deal to be made.
Well, and I think in retrospect, maybe the lighting should have never been shown on the PDO.
Exactly.
Because that's where I think the confusion came, is that when you see it on the plan and when the code says you have jurisdiction over the plan, you know, the problem is that, you know, where that runs afoul of due process and the applicant's rights, the Constitution's always going to win. So, you know, we had essentially a code saying you have authority over this entire PDO, but we had property that was not the property owner issue on the PDO. And so, you know, when we were talking about that night, that's really why I think it became so confusing, because under a strict literal interpretation of the code, you would have had authority over those lights. But looking at it in terms of constitutionally, what burden are we putting on that applicant? You know, Constitution trumps. So.
The most we could have said was, yes, we approve the application.
And maybe
but
taken.
We're directing staff to drop the idea of the Sternberg lights.
Right, maybe just taking it off the plan. Right.
Why don't we ask staff to come back with some language regarding lighting in residential areas, whether it be downcast and, you know, the implications of that, or a big red circle with a line through it over a Sternberg light. I'm kidding. Julio.
The only thing I'm thinking about when I look at this lighting regulation, the trigger for this is on somebody wanting to do something more, change the use, expand the use, etc.
To some degree, although there is a standard in there that applies to everybody citywide as well that everybody has to meet at some point.
It isn't in there. It isn't in there. It's in Charlie's book.
No. It's in our ordinance that everybody had to meet.
Well, the reason why I bring it up is the trigger that I'm looking at here is typically it's on a private property. They want to do something, and so therefore, but the lighting that we're concerned about, at least I'm concerned about, is the lighting that's in the right-of-way. Mm-hmm. And I guess the two should not be linked, because there should be a separate lighting plan that we have all looked at or know about or at least seen, and the city council and their final authority have approved. And so therefore, there's something there that everybody either agrees to or disagrees, or for whatever reason. But not to have one that's visible and has been approved or updated or et cetera, to me is creating a lot of hardship and problems in people's thinking of what's going on. Because I automatically and I bring up the Sternbergs only because they're the easiest ones for me to talk about. You know, I like it downtown, along Main Street. If you want to put them along Prince Street to some degree, I don't really have a big issue, even though they don't go that far.
Well, the plan hasn't going the full length.
Well, okay, but I haven't seen the plan.
Right.
Anyway, and going up to Winterberg on one side and Santa Fe on the other, or maybe crossing further to Bowles, that's another issue. But that's all I know.
How about if you come back with some language for us to consider on lighting, and maybe a copy of that plan that shows where they're proposed to extend ultimately as things stand now. David, one sentence, and then we're going to move on.
Okay, I still think we need to bear in mind the necessity of somewhere within comp plan or zoning ordinance or design standards and guidelines, reasonable variations in lighting from one residential area to another, rather than saying the old downtown neighborhood residential area is going to have the same lighting as the northeast Littleton area of high-rise apartment buildings, mid-rise apartment buildings, or Shady Croft.
In other areas of the city, when we consider those in the comprehensive plan, we may do something different, or for the overall view of it, we might put something in there.
Or another thing you could do is just hold off on the lighting until you've done the rest of the city.
Right.
Well-
And determine what would be most appropriate for this area.
So remembering that in this mixed use, the mixed use neighborhoods, we have, what, 3 of them, Sarah Jane? The mixed use neighborhoods that are going to have commercial or retail, office, commercial, residential, we need to come up with a standard that's going to be flexible enough to deal with different situations there, rather than painting them all with the same brush.
We'll have to schedule another meeting. All right, discussion of bin items. We've fallen behind dramatically.
That never happens.
Good, thanks. No, that's great.
All right.
I think we really only had one bin item as of today. What was the bin item that you came up with? Do you remember what it was? What did I tell you, Linda? I apologize. I emailed you and said, here's the one thing we were talking about. And it has escaped me. I apologize.
Get back on the schedule.
Yes. Sorry. You're blank too? Yeah.
Sorry.
It was something that made a lot of sense. Linda, do you remember what it was? I can go look at the email too. We really kind of run out of, most of them we were able to address ourselves, I think, at that
And
point.
most of them we've put into the R5 discussion.
Right, in our discussion, I think that's probably where they ended up. I think you're right. I think it's where most of them were.
So we never really explicitly, even straw poll, voted on any one of these. It was basically, here's the thinking that you had collected on each of those items, talked about it at a meeting, and now you,
What are you referring to? I'm sorry.
the bin item.
Oh, the bin items? The bin items are the questions that we had that we
Yeah.
needed some clarification on. Right.
I've got those.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We did a lot of that last time.
Yeah.
I think offering the clarification, and then what they had left, it sounds like they put into the
R5.
R5.
That's right.
That was where the questions mostly arose, other than one that's
Out there somewhere.
in the fog. About if we go on, and if you come up with that,
If it comes to us, I don't know what the other one was. It's true. Schedule, just want to talk a little bit about that just briefly. So we were thinking about then going out and having a neighborhood meeting with the discussion that we've had here, probably the first week in December, which would be, so it'd be like 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, somewhere in there, I believe is where it actually, the second week starts, where we would do notification of all the property owners and the residents and the business owners in the R5 district, just to say, we're going to get together one more time, kind of run through what we're thinking about. So we'll have one more meeting before that to finalize those. But we just thought that the kind of discussion we've been having, it's one area that we really think it's important to go back and talk to those people and give them more of a heads up.
Invite them here?
We're going to invite them to this room is what we're thinking, yeah. If there aren't that many, if we need to, we could go next door. It just isn't as conducive to conversation. But we're going to try and set it up so that, and we can kind of get a sense in terms of how many people will be showing up, I guess, as to which room we take. We can go either way, whatever you think. But and that's kind of sitting out there in terms of what we'd like to do. We're finalizing the draft. We're hoping to get that out to you at the next meeting. So we will have a draft and then get your sense in terms of it's a complete draft in terms of have all the sections in it, as much material as we have. Doesn't mean that we've got it right at this point, but we want to get your feedback in terms of are we in the right direction. And then once we have that, of course, we will then go to staff review and then come back to Planning Commission for public hearing, and then take that on to City Council for ratification. So staff review in this case is different departments in terms of how they're impacted by it. If they see anything that's outstanding that is a problem they want to bring back to you and say this doesn't work for us, something that they think we've missed, we need to add. And so that kind of feedback is real important for us as well as other members of the community development staff. It's kind of where we're heading at this point. So, Willie, did you have?
Well, you know, the more I look at this, this here, and if this is going to be kind of the center point or the jewel of the entire thing, I like the term of downtown Littleton framework. However, it really, in my mind, is more of a proposed land use area map. And I'm not opposed to that when I say that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying to you that it might have been easier to some degree, and I was thinking of that tonight as I was driving home from work, that because you have all these legends on the side and the colors and things of that sort, and we have now talked for about almost an hour and a half just on the trying to create a parameter, if you will, for the old downtown neighborhood. I could say the same thing for the red area. I could do the same thing for the other, whatever mustard color if you want, and the purples and everything else. And to some degree, I could see the terminology here in a similar fashion of what we just talked about. One being a primary, if you will, of what we want to see in that area, and what the secondary is. Like in the red area, you could say, you know, all I'm doing is, instead of having one long paragraph, you know, it's kind of breaking it up a little bit so that people will get the idea of what's primary for this particular area, what's secondary, and then generally speaking, what you mean by that. That way, it might be helpful. It's just a thought, something I was dreaming about as I was driving home, and I thought it might help a lot, I think. Because I like this, I like the way this is, and I like to improve upon this to the point where it's simple, easy, and pretty free going, free moving, if you will. And in the certain areas where we talk about, you know, I don't think we'd say a change in zoning for some of the other stuff. I don't see the CA really changing, unless somebody really has some heartburn in the red area versus that in the mustard area. I guess that's the, you know, that would be the bigger.
I think there's tinkering that needs to be done with all of them in terms of the uses, that it's just some of them aren't current, and processes, we know there's some revisions that need to be made. But I would agree, I think very minor compared to what we're looking for.
Yeah, and I like, you know, after all this time, I think it's really nice to see what I think that has been boiled down to. It appears to be simple, but it's not.
Well, as I was going
A lot of work to get here.
Yeah, as I was going through all the different folders and all the different files and looking at, you know, what's been said, something really stuck out. The City Council was very clear. They're saying, keep it simple. And so we're really trying to simplify, we're really trying to consolidate, we're really trying to pull all these ideas into as simple a sense as possible. I think this helps dramatically when we're trying to do that with the text.
And that's what I was remembering too. So.
Yeah. So.
I'll jump in. If you're going to talk about the mustard area, I think we ought to talk about the red as ketchup and the green as relish.
That's fine with me. I don't care what it, you can so label it that way for all I care.
Maybe not.
Okay.
David.
You've heard this before, all I'm doing is rephrasing it. Keeping it simple is great, but if we give the impression with our color blocks, that we're applying the same standards and expectations to properties along Main Street as we are in the rest of the red zone, and I don't think anybody's ever suggested that.
The ketchup, yeah.
If we're applying the same standards and requirements for businesses along Alamo and Prince, or for properties along Alamo and Prince, as we're applying to all the other areas in that mustard zone away from Prince and Alamo, we're giving the wrong impression, because that's not where we're headed.
Do the rest of you think it's that definitive from this map? I guess I don't think it's that definitive.
If we cover it in the text, that's fine, but as a first impression,
right.
I mean, that's what a graphic is. We argued week after week about what the graphic was for, trying to make a solid impression, make a clear impression of what we're trying to do, what the vision is for the city.
I'll add this week to the week after week.
Okay.
Understood. Does that, I'm curious to know if the rest of you think there's the implications that the red or the mustard color carries, as David was expressing, that we're applying the same standards throughout that? Or is it more of a, here's an area of the city that we see centered around Main Street and Alamo. Here's an area of the city, and it's identified here, old downtown neighborhood, residential, mixed use, and so on. I guess I don't start to draw that many conclusions from a map like this.
And I think the text covers it in the residential mixed-use districts, so.
Someone's going to have to explain something to me. Why do we keep calling it residential mixed use? Mixed use is commercial, office, retail, residential. Why do we keep calling it residential mixed use?
It's often distinguished, a residential mixed use, a commercial mixed use, what's your primary use is kind of like we're saying our old downtown neighborhood is primarily focused on residential. And I think the mixed use, there are different types of mixed uses. Kind of like there's a work-live and a live-work as a mixed use structure. And when you talk about mixed use, you really look at what the focus is. Is it primarily residential that allows a mixture of uses, or is it primarily an industrial area that allows residential to be there? So it's just a change in focus as much as that.
So we're saying
Well,
the
that's
mustard
why I was
area is
saying
all
that
primarily
primary-
residential with some mixed use
Right.
thrown in? That's what we're saying?
Primary and
Really?
secondary.
I think that's the character, yeah, is we're saying these areas have a residential character compared to the Main Street district.
Do you know how many houses there are in that area south of Little Street?
But you look at the
That's
design.
turned red.
That's right. But
Oh,
that's
it's
red.
even worse.
No, it's gone red, yeah, because of that. And that was part of the argument, I think, it was why it should go red. Whereas you look at the design guidelines for the mustard areas, you know, they really are trying to say, let's try to use that as the base, the residential character that was here or is here now, even when it's redeveloping. So even if the uses change, the design guidelines say residential.
Peace has come to the Planning Commission. All right. In lieu of recalling whatever that bin item was, maybe you can email it to everyone if
I will, yes. I find
you guys come up with it.
it really is. I know it's in there somewhere.
The only other thing I could think of is grandfathering the existing medical facilities.
Yeah, we did talk about that.
Yeah, I thought we talked about it adequately.
I had a question. In your discussion of the schedule, you talked about notifying the residents down here, and your map shows a third or a half of the parcels with a secondary address, and so those absentee owners or whatever the...
Notified by mail. Right.
So you'll mail those people also, which could be simply somebody, somewhere else in the city or quite remote. All right.
Yeah, I think the latest we want to go would be the second week in December, just because we really start losing people at that point. But I think just so that we can move forward, we really need to do that.
That's a great transition to upcoming meetings.
Good. We've got, next meeting here is November 22nd, and then we go to December 13th, and then we have a meeting on December 27th. And we really want to check with you and see, is that realistic? Do we want to do that? Do we want to, if we want to skip that meeting and maybe have an extra meeting in January, or just skip that meeting entirely? If we go to the Monday before, it's December 20th, that's not much better. So it's December 20th or the 27th. I think we lose people either way. Christmas Day is that Saturday before our meeting on the 27th, so. Yeah.
I'm here either one.
Okay. We're certainly willing to do it.
27th is okay with me, I guess, as far as I know. We don't really have, I think 27th is better than the week before Christmas, isn't it?
Could we leave it to if we're at a point where there's something we really need to talk about?
Okay.
Because I'm available, but
Okay. Yeah, we definitely can't leave it open at this point.
Okay. That works for me.
I wish you a Merry Christmas or a Happy New Year. Or whatever.
winter solstice.
Yeah, I can think of something.
Can I bring something up related to what Dave Metcalf was saying? On the residential mixed-use district, the text says the residential mixed-use districts present an excellent opportunity to add a significant number of housing units downtown. New housing will strengthen the neighborhood and support the Main Street district businesses. I just wanted to see if you guys agreed with that statement, and was that the sense of the discussion that you had?
That's a good question.
I think it works okay for me. I mean,
Except
I
now
can-
there's two of them.
I got two that said three.
Only residential? I mean, half of those areas more than half of those areas right now is not residential. You see this going more residential rather than more commercial mixed use?
When you have the apartments above and retail on the first floor, I guess physically there's more units that are apartments.
We're not dictating that every new development be that way.
Oh, no,
It's
no.
the possibility is open for mixed-use development.
absolutely.
A site could be all residential, all office, all retail, or some mix thereof.
Yeah, and it says it also contains office, retail, and other non-residential uses.
And I understand what you're saying, Linda, about the idea that the opportunities for more of and more variety in housing is going to increase the possibility of more people shopping, working, whatever, downtown. But quite frankly, so do more offices, more retail space. And I thought that's what we're talking about conceivably in these areas, all of which would contribute to the activity level and the built-in constituency centered around the Main Street district. So I don't.
They all do. I think it's just kind of what the focus is, that if we want additional residential, this is an area that seems very appropriate for a concentration of residential. Whereas, the other areas have a little different sense to them in terms of what they are and what the focus may be. Main Street may have some residential, but it's primarily retail. The industrial areas are going to stay industrial for now. The area to the south, the Main Street South, is going to have some residential in there. We've got some residential approved in there already. But it's really not thought of primarily as an area of residential character. It may have a more of a commercial character to it with residential uses in it. So it's kind of that character as much as anything and what the focus is.
And I think we took that from some of the work that Dick Farley did when he talked about that area having, even though it does have commercial uses in it, it has the feel of residential, and that's part of its character.
I recommend strongly that everybody drive through those areas and then come back and talk about it at the next meeting.
If you look at the design, I'd read the design guidelines again in those districts, because that was the premise, and we had that discussion, I think, in terms of, it was, and again, I kind of go back to, if this were a green field, if this were totally blank, you'd still want to say with this large an area, you'd want to have areas that distinguish themselves from one another in terms of character. And so instead of having to create that, what the design guidelines do, they go through and say, what historically has been the character in these areas, let's continue that. And the uses may change, the scale may change, but we're retaining that character. So you have that sense of history and what distinguishes them.
But we also have to allow for future evolution and future growth. If our requirements for especially the area right on Main Street, as far as how high, how dense, how deep, how much office space can go in, you're essentially forcing some uses out into this mixed-use area where they can have an exposed parking lot.
This doesn't say you can't do that. It's just saying.
But the idea of saying it's residential mixed use, the primary focus is on residential, is ignoring a very likely development in those areas, likely because that's what's been happening for the last 15 years.
So are you arguing, David, it should just be called mixed use?
Mixed use, period. Unless we are going to turn our standards and the description of what's going on or what's allowed in those areas or the character of the buildings in those areas or the uses in those areas, unless we're going to consciously, purposely slant it toward favoring residential, then we're calling it something that we don't intend. We intend it as a mixed use, whatever the market dictates, rather than saying it's going to be primarily residential. It isn't now.
One of the things that I really liked about Julio's suggestion that we change that mustard color that we were at one time calling the south area, south of Little Creek, to red, and with that directing commercial, retail, and office space to that area, because that's what it is today, was that I thought that, we talked about it a little bit afterwards, and I thought that was a really good suggestion, because then it really does separate the character of, if somebody came in to see Chris at the economic gardening program and said, geez, I have this office idea, where's really the appropriate place to put it? He's got some direction to push it down into there, where it really is going to start to look more like a business and commercial area. And that leaves this area to be more residential. Part of the reason that...
The northern area.
Yes. And what that does is it starts to, yes, they are both mixed use. You'll still see residential in here. You'll still see commercial here. But it gives some distinction, and it gives some direction. So that's where it came from.
So under that scenario, Chris would discourage that particular inquirer from looking at a site up in the, what are we calling it, the Midtown neighborhood, on a lot that happens to be between two existing office buildings.
I think that he would pull out something like this and say, this is where we're headed. And that this is really the commercial mixed-use area, if you will, and this is the residential mixed-use.
So then we're going to be very clear. That area north of Main Street, we're going to say, we're going to discourage commercial development.
No, I think you're twisting my words.
Oh, well, no, I'm trying to get a sense of what we're trying to say with all this. Right now, that area is more than 50% commercial. So what are we trying to say to property owners or somebody who wants to come in and develop something? Don't do business, don't put a commercial use in there because we're trying to hold the line and not go any farther in tilting toward commercial instead of residential?
It's not that explicit.
I know it isn't that explicit, but
Nor are we
we're
trying
de
to be.
facto doing it and we're pretending we're not.
All right, well, you might believe that, but
You keep saying it's the primary use. Nowhere in this paragraph does it say it's the primary use. She didn't say it's the primary use. If you read this paragraph, it doesn't say anything about it being primary use residential. It talks about being a mixed use, office, retail, and non-residential uses. And then it says it's an excellent opportunity for additional residential. But it doesn't say we're encouraging or we require.
But she read that in order to refute my concern that we call it a residential mixed use when we really just mean mixed use. All I'm saying is, if we're going to declare that particular area to be primarily mixed use or tilted toward mixed use, or primarily residential or tilted toward residential, or whatever else we're going to do, then let's be explicit about it.
Well, and if we go back to the community input, I sat on the housing table for 2 meetings, and almost everybody that came to my table said, we want more rooftops downtown. We want more housing downtown. Now, those were business owners and commercial owners. Those are the people that were out, but that's what they said. And if we're going to listen to what the community has to say, then I don't know that we'd say this is a primary residential area, but it is a residential mixed use. And I agree with Sarah Jane on changing that lower end to more of a commercial mixed use.
I'm not arguing with the intent. I'm arguing with what we're saying on the face of it. It's, I was the only one, obviously.
Jenny, did you have something to?
Well, it is nice to give, I think that when you're in a residential setting and having that continuity of having more residential in a certain area is going to encourage more residential to happen. So I like the delineation of the residential and then keeping more of the commercial designation more in the red. That's more of a primary. And I mean, it is the mixed use, so that it's not going to restrict someone who is a business owner to go into the residential mixed use. But it definitely does give some guidance for someone who may not be as familiar with the area, looking at what's the direction. So.
We still have the possibility of adjourning early. Is there anything else?
One more comment. With what I read, I just have a problem with saying adding a significant number of housing units. I think we can say add housing units, and that would convey our ideas adequately.
Yeah.
That's just
I'd
me
agree with
wordsmithing.
that. I I'm not sure what significant number would be. Perhaps defined as a percentage of what's there. That, should we make that editorial? Everybody agree with Linda?
I do.
I'm okay with saying yes.
3? Okay.
Maybe just
Good.
increase housing units rather than, maybe
The
instead
opportunity
of
to
significant,
increase
just increase.
Okay. Sound good. All right. Pam? Yes? Hang on. Just so that everyone that's at home, we had one of the residents and owners that is in the downtown neighborhood, but so they can hear you, you need to be on a microphone. So
I was going to ask if you'd let me.
sure, please. And for any other residents out there, we'd love to have you come down in person.
Yeah, I'm glad that you've kind of made a window for residents to give input in a couple of weeks. So my name is Pam Chadbourne, and I live at 5402 is in our 5 area, and I live in this area that you guys are discussing. It's no. I don't know whether this is the right idea. It occurs to me as a resident, based on what I experience. What I experience is traffic, noise, and light because of certain streets. So there's Prince Street, Littleton Boulevard, Santa Fe, and Bellevue. And I'm going to say that the traffic drives, to me, the development and the rezoning of this area. We're not going to change the traffic patterns in Littleton Boulevard. Stress, Santa Fe is only going to get worse. Bellevue is a stressed street. So these traffic corridors drive the nature of what's going to be there. If you're a business, you want to be on them. If you're a resident, you don't. And I'm going to suggest that the rezoning can kind of consider a perimeter idea. So the perimeter would be around the traffic patterns where your businesses want to be. And then the protected areas are inside where residents are going to be. And that will change the distribution of what's there now. But we're talking about what the vision is going to be in 25 years. So that's the other thing that I was going to ask for is what do you guys see in 25 years? And I would like to see, like I say, I think the traffic drives it. I think the businesses are going to be along the conduits. And I hope that there will be some pockets of residential areas and places that are not driven by traffic. So maybe the rezoning kind of goes along those streets or not. And that would drive where the lighting is. But also, my personal problem is noise. How are you going to protect people on the perimeter from noise from this traffic and loud people walking by and a lot of cars with bad mufflers and things like that? So this kind of zoning addresses those issues for those of us who are on the first line from these kind of attacks on our residential experience. And then the people inside will have a more protected area to be. So, I'm curious if anybody has thoughts about that, but based on my experience, I can tell you that it's these traffic conduits that drive the nature of my experience. And if you can protect me from that, the guys inside will be fine. We'll have good residential areas inside.
I think to some degree, without having heard your conversation till now, we have been thinking along those lines. And that's one of the reasons why, early on, and I don't know if it was before you came or not, we were saying that we're really trying to keep this area that we commonly call the R5, but would like to see it changed to something else, to be more single-family, more the way it is, and limit the impacts of growth rather than turn it over to growth. And so saying that, I think that's our goal, generally speaking. And we cover what you're talking about. However, the corridors of Prince and Santa Fe are something that we're really not going to be in a position to really deal with and say we can modify the noise. The only thing, the best we can do is keep it out of your area, you know, and protect your area, and that's about the best. And, you know, everything from noise to lighting and, you know, some of the other conversations we've heard about expansions and all this other stuff.
Well, that's why I mention it, because I'm in R5, and where I'm at maybe needs to be a business. I get noise from Santa Fe. It's a half block off Santa Fe. There's a lot of people going in and out from there. And because it's R5, you were talking about size limits and development limits for my property, and that may not be appropriate because of where it is, because of the traffic pattern.
Well, I guess the way I look at it is a little bit differently. I'm trying to look at it from the standpoint that that particular residential area is unique in and of itself. The R5 zoning category that you've been blessed with or hindered with has been there forever and a day. The anticipation is that possibly your residential area was created at a time where there was no zoning, no setbacks, no nothing, and yet there it is. So instead of leaning more to the R5, we're leaning more to the way it is today. Now, not to say that sometime in the future, you know, the entire area could change dramatically, and your comments could be taken in at least a different fashion and dealing more with the noise and more with all that other stuff. I just don't see it right now. Again, I rely on the folks, yourself and other folks that we had heard from, you know, and you know, the zoning cases we've seen, that this is a very unique area, and this is really, in my opinion, as much as Main Street is, we're trying to maintain its older character as best we can, we're trying to do the same thing for this area as well.
And I appreciate that.
Rightfully or wrongfully. And at least that's until something really changes our minds, or there's a big fire, or, you know, I mean, you know, there's a lot of things that we can't control. Well, I don't know. I'm not trying to be sadistic about it. I'm just saying, I mean, things change. I mean, you know, there's certain things out of our, you know, out of our purview that do change. I mean, well.
I was going to mention, you mentioned Bellevue, and of course, Alexa went from an industrial use to residential, but they're separated vertically from Bellevue. One of the things that occurred in the past that helped a lot was to get the trains underground, or not underground, into a railroad depression. And so perhaps, I think certainly your family has owned that property long enough, and maybe you've been residing there long enough to remember, you know, in the past, a lot more noise, not to mention traffic congestion. So one of the mitigations for traffic noise and so on is a vertical, and where we have, at the risk of going back to residential mixed-use districts, if you have commercial or retail on the first floor and people living above, that those people are removed from some of the traffic noise by the vertical.
Well,
if you want to, you know, if you want an apartment or a townhome or something, you know, if you condominium, if you want to, that's one way that occurs. Now, it won't do you any good on your property. You, of course, could become a medical doctor or a dentist.
right.
If you feel like going back to school.
And I know about the, you know, first floor. That's more a high-density downtown area. Story business. And that's what you guys are doing in the plan. You're describing what those are going to be.
In some of the areas, yeah.
And I'm saying those belong along the traffic routes. And inside are the single-family homes that you want to protect and enhance. I'm going to tell you, my vision is those single-family homes start to get more green. We need renovation in this area. I would like to see a revitalized area. I would like you to create a plan that creates excitement for our residents on the inside here to go green, to, you know, select. You were talking about restrictions on destruction or construction.
Right,
I would say, yeah, make a plan that actually encourages selective rebuilding, creates alternative power sources, good water use, roofs that are energy efficient, and the lighting is part of this. But it all feeds a greater vision. I'm going to tell you that that would create to me an exciting area to put business and to live. It gives a theme for Littleton. It's forward-looking. It's going to cost us less in the future, so it's a really good thing to. And I'd like to see a vision beyond just the specs. What are we going to create? And I can see this neighborhood. I can tell you. I live down there. I would like to see this happen. To me, this is a positive thing, and it can be achieved in this.
David?
It's a great vision, but you're ascribing to us powers that we don't have. We can't dictate those things.
Well, don't worry, I'm not, the plan is one of many things that has to happen, but I think a lot of people would, these things need nourishment. There's seeds, and then there's watering and compost and growth and all of that.
So you're saying for your property, you would rather see it as like kind of a residential mixed-use property, primarily focusing on business, as opposed to
I'm worried
residential?
about where I live because I don't know the plan. Part of what I need to see from this plan is how you're going to protect me from that triangle where the Essex House is. I see people really wanting to develop that and get tax money. And if you have a bunch of parking lot and a whole bunch of lights and a bunch of noise, it's not appropriate for someone to live in the house I live in. And this is why I want you to consider this perimeter idea. It's like a cell. You have the outer area, which you harden or protect. It's a filter. It's a way to protect the inside where people live. So there's noise and lights and stuff outside, and then there's and this is, there's communities all over the United States who have solved this. So my other suggestion was to copy early and often. There's other communities that have solved this and kind of made this.
I think part of what you're talking about is more in the design standards when we talk about landscaping and, again, parking.
And zoning.
And zoning, but not specifically about the comprehensive plan.
I understand that. Remember, my initial introduction here was because of the design standards, not because of the plan. And so they're integrated, and totally what I'm talking about depends on engineering, because if we were going to get green support, the engineers would need to be involved. They'd need to be a resource for the citizens who are going to rebuild their houses. So.
And actually, when Pablos and I were working on the housing, and what's interesting, this is kind of an overview of what we've been working on, and so each of us have broken down into different groups and looked specifically at different components. But when Pablos and I looked at the housing, we were looking at some of the green, sustainable pieces of how you might incorporate that. And so it's one thing that we have been talking about, trying to integrate that into the housing, and so it is on within our radar in discussion.
Yeah.
So that which is good to hear as well from.
Well, we've got a community college there, so we've got education resources that could help our community do that. Greensboro, Kansas, the community that was destroyed in the tornado, and they rebuilt entirely green. Well, we could do something like that for renovation inside of our city and development for years.
Before we drift into from fire to tornadoes to floods, which
Tsunamis.
a couple meetings ago we talked about floodplains. We have about a minute left. Thank you, Pam.
Thanks very much for letting me talk.
Certainly, we like the input. We like to have the citizens come down. Is there anything else other than a motion to adjourn? Do I hear such? And a second?
Second.
Very good. All in favor? Aye. Thank you.